Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Foundations of Trust. Marcus Mills stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline stretch beneath gray clouds. At 42, he had built Mills Security Solutions from nothing into an empire worth $50 million. His company provided high-end security systems and private protection services to the wealthy elite, politicians, and corporations. Marcus understood people's vulnerabilities. It was his business. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd been blind to the vulnerabilities in his own home. 20 years ago, Marcus had been a different man. Growing up in foster care after his parents died in a car crash, he'd learned early that the world owed him nothing. He'd clawed his way through community college, then into the military, specializing in intelligence and counter-surveillance. The skills he'd learned tracking terrorists in Afghanistan had served him well in the private sector. That's where he'd met Winter Simpson at a charity gala in 2010. She was 25, a striking blonde with jade eyes who worked as an event coordinator for high-profile clients. Winter came from old Seattle money. The Simpsons owned several tech startups and real estate holdings. She was everything Marcus thought he wanted: beautiful, connected, and seemingly devoted to building a life together. Their daughter Lola had been born 3 years later, a bright-eyed girl who inherited her mother's beauty and her father's sharp intellect. Marcus had believed he finally had everything: a loving family, financial security, and respect in his community. But Marcus Mills had always been a man who planned for contingencies. In his line of work, paranoia was a survival trait. He'd installed discreet monitoring systems throughout their Bellevue mansion, ostensibly for security, but also because old habits died hard. He'd learned to trust, but never completely. The call had come at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Lola had collapsed at school during cheerleading practice. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. The words had hit Marcus like a sniper's bullet. Unexpected, devastating, and changing everything in an instant. Seattle Children's Hospital became their second home. Marcus threw every resource he had at Lola's treatment, flying in specialists from around the world, funding experimental therapies. The bills were astronomical, but money meant nothing compared to his daughter's life. Winter had seemed equally devoted during those first weeks, sleeping in hospital chairs, coordinating with doctors. But Marcus noticed small things: hush phone calls she'd take in the hallway, unexplained absences when she said she was going home to shower or rest. His security training had taught him to trust his instincts. Something was wrong. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Foundation. The discovery came on a Thursday evening in October. Marcus had left the hospital earlier than usual to handle some urgent business calls from his home office. Lola was stable after her latest round of chemotherapy, and Winter had insisted she'd stay the night. Marcus pulled into his driveway at 8:30 p.m., but immediately noticed Winter's Mercedes in the garage. Strange, since she'd told him she was at the hospital. Even stranger was the unfamiliar black Audi parked across the street. Years of surveillance work had taught Marcus to move like a ghost. He entered through the back door, his footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. The house felt different, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. He heard them before he saw them. Winter's laughter, breathy and intimate, drifted down from their bedroom. Then a man's voice, deep and unfamiliar, saying something that made her giggle again. Marcus had faced armed insurgents without his pulse rising above 60 beats per minute. But standing in his own hallway, listening to his wife betray their daughter's trust while their child fought for her life, something cold and terrible crystallized in his chest. He climbed the stairs with deadly silence, each step calculated. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, Marcus saw his wife of 13 years in bed with a man he recognized. Zion Larson, a high-end divorce attorney who'd represented several of Marcus's wealthy clients. Zion was around 35, tall and lean with dark hair and the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having to fight for anything. He came from a family of lawyers. His father was a federal judge, his mother a former prosecutor. Zion specialized in representing wealthy women in messy divorces, taking hefty percentages and often much more than money from his grateful clients. Marcus watched them for exactly 90 seconds, burning every detail into his memory. Then he backed away, descended the stairs, and left through the same door he'd entered. He didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, Marcus drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in a corner booth, drinking black coffee and thinking. In his work, the most successful operations required patience, planning, and perfect timing. Emotional reactions got people killed. By dawn, Marcus had made his decision. He would give Winter enough rope to hang herself. Then he would methodically destroy both her and Zion Larson in ways they couldn't imagine. But first, he needed to know exactly how deep this betrayal went. Chapter 3. The Abyss Stares Back. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus became a man living two lives. By day, he was the devoted husband and father, splitting time between the hospital and his business. By night, he was a predator gathering intelligence on his prey. Marcus activated every surveillance system in his house and added a few Winter didn't know about. He tracked her phone, her computer, her credit cards. He placed micro cameras in her car and hired his best operative, Adam White, to conduct discreet surveillance. What they uncovered was worse than simple adultery. Winter and Zion had been planning Marcus's destruction for over 8 months. The affair had started after Zion represented one of Winter's friends in a divorce that netted the woman $30 million. Winter had been impressed by Zion's ruthlessness and skill at hiding assets. Their plan was elegant in its cruelty. Wait until Marcus was most vulnerable, during Lola's illness, then systematically drain his accounts while he was distracted by hospital visits and medical decisions. Winter had access to most of Marcus's business accounts through their joint holdings. She'd been moving money in small increments to accounts Zion had helped her establish, all while playing the devoted wife. But the real revelation came when Marcus discovered their endgame. Audio recordings from his home office revealed Winter and Zion discussing how to frame Marcus for financial crimes once they'd stolen enough money. Zion knew prosecutors and judges who would fast-track charges against Marcus while protecting the evidence that he'd been embezzling from his own clients. The plan was to leave Marcus bankrupt, imprisoned, and unable to care for Lola, at which point Winter would have full custody of their daughter and control of any remaining assets. Marcus listened to these recordings in his car outside the hospital, watching his daughter sleep through the window of her room. Lola was responding well to treatment. Her doctors were cautiously optimistic, but she would need ongoing care for years, maybe decades. The woman he'd trusted with his life and his daughter's future was preparing to destroy them both for money and the thrill of betrayal. That night, Marcus made a call to his old military contact, Spencer Ortiz, who now ran a discreet private military company. Spencer owed Marcus several favors from their time in Afghanistan, where Marcus had saved Spencer's life during an ambush. "I need resources," Marcus told him, "and I need absolute loyalty." "Whatever you need, brother," Spencer replied without hesitation. Marcus began assembling his team. Adam White would handle surveillance and technical support. Spencer would provide muscle and specialized skills. Marcus would also need to involve his business partner, Taylor Davis, who managed the financial side of Mill Security Solutions and had skills in forensic accounting. But Marcus kept the details to himself. This wasn't about justice or exposing criminals. This was about creating a hell that Winter and Zion would live in until they died. The war was about to begin, and Marcus Mills intended to be the only survivor. As he drove home that night, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Winter, staying at hospital tonight. "Love you." Marcus smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Chapter 4. The War Machine. Marcus spent the following week building his arsenal with the precision of a military operation. His first call was to Taylor Davis, his business partner and the closest thing he had to a brother. Taylor had grown up in the same foster system as Marcus, and they'd served together in Army intelligence before starting Mill Security Solutions. Taylor was a quiet man with an exceptional mind for numbers and strategy. He'd been the one to suggest they start their security company, recognizing that paranoid rich people would pay premium prices for peace of mind. Over 15 years, Taylor had helped Marcus build a client list that read like a who's who of Seattle's elite. "We need to talk." Marcus told Taylor over secure phone. Private. Tonight. They met at Marcus's secondary office, a discreet facility across town where Mills Security conducted its most sensitive operations. The building was a fortress equipped with every surveillance countermeasure money could buy. Marcus laid out everything. The affair, the financial theft, the frame-up plan. Taylor listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each revelation. How much have they stolen? Taylor asked when Marcus finished. $750,000 so far, Marcus replied. But that's just the beginning. They're planning to take everything, then put me in prison. Taylor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What do you need? I need you to create a financial maze, Marcus said. Move our real assets somewhere they can't touch them. Make it look like we're vulnerable while actually being untouchable. And then we make them disappear. Taylor nodded slowly. I'll need 48 hours to restructure everything. What about Lola? Lola is off limits, Marcus said firmly. She never gets touched by any of this. Whatever happens, she stays innocent. Over the next 3 days, Taylor worked his magic with offshore accounts, shell companies, and investment vehicles that would take forensic accountants years to unravel. Meanwhile, Marcus coordinated with Spencer Ortiz to identify Zion Larson's vulnerabilities. Spencer's research revealed that Zion had expensive tastes and dangerous habits. He was a high-stakes gambler who owed money to some very unpleasant people in Portland's underground scene. He also had a cocaine problem he thought he'd hidden from his law partners. But Spencer's most interesting discovery concerned Zion's family. The Larsons were old money Seattle, with political connections and a reputation to protect. Zion's father, federal judge Robert Larson, was being considered for the state Supreme Court. Any scandal involving his son would destroy those ambitions. Marcus began to see the outlines of his strategy. He wouldn't just destroy Winter and Zion. He'd obliterate their entire support systems. The first phase began on a Friday evening. Marcus had been tracking Winter's movements and knew she would be meeting Zion at their usual hotel that night, while Marcus supposedly attended a business dinner. Instead, Marcus and Adam White positioned themselves outside the hotel with high-powered cameras and surveillance equipment. They captured everything: Zion's arrival, Winter's subsequent appearance, and their intimate behavior in what they thought was a private setting. But Marcus wasn't interested in simple blackmail. These photos were just the first piece of a much larger puzzle. Phase 2 involved Spencer making contact with Zion's gambling debts. It turned out that Zion owed $200,000 to a Portland crime family that was growing impatient. Spencer, using his connections in the underground world, bought Zion's debt for 50 cents on the dollar. Now Marcus owned Zion's problems, and he was about to make them much worse. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. The confrontation came on a gray November morning. Marcus had been waiting for the perfect moment, and Winter had finally given it to him. He'd returned to the hospital after his morning run, coffee in hand, when he found Winter in the hallway outside Lola's room, speaking in hushed tones on her phone. She didn't see him approach, and her words froze his blood. Yes, the account transfer went through last night. That's $750,000 total now. We can move forward with the next phase. Marcus stepped around the corner, and Winter's eyes went wide. She quickly ended the call. Who was that? Marcus asked calmly. Just coordinating with the insurance company, Winter stammered. About Lola's treatment costs. Marcus nodded slowly. Which insurance company uses personal cell phones for coordination? And why would they need account transfers? Winter's face flushed. Marcus, Save it, Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but something in his tone made Winter step backward. I know about Zion. I know about the money. I know about all of it. For a moment, Winter looked genuinely afraid. Then her expression hardened, and Marcus saw the real woman who'd been hiding behind 13 years of marriage. You were never supposed to find out this way, she said coldly. But since you have, let's be honest. I needed that money more than you did. You'll make more. You always do. But I have a future to secure. Our daughter is fighting for her life, Marcus said, his voice deadly calm. And you're stealing money meant for her treatment to fund your affair. Winter actually smirked. Lola will be fine. The doctors say she's responding well. But I won't spend the rest of my life tied to a man who thinks security cameras and paranoia count as a personality. So you decided to steal from our daughter's medical fund and frame me for financial crimes. Winter's smirk faltered. How did you? I know about Zion's plan to have me arrested. I know about the prosecutors he's contacted. I know about the accounts you've hidden and the evidence you've manufactured. Marcus stepped closer and Winter backed against the wall. You picked the wrong man to betray, he said softly. I've toppled governments and eliminated terrorists. Did you really think you could outsmart me? Before Winter could respond, they heard footsteps. Zion Larson rounded the corner, expensive suit crisp despite the early hour. Winter, you were supposed to... He stopped when he saw Marcus. Oh, Mr. Mills. Marcus turned to face the man who'd been planning his destruction. Zion was handsome in a soft way, the kind of man who'd never been tested by real hardship. Zion, Marcus said pleasantly, I was just telling my wife how much I appreciate your legal advice. Zion's confidence wavered. I'm not sure what you mean. Of course you don't, Marcus smiled. By the way, how's your gambling problem? Still owe money to the Torino family in Portland. The color drained from Zion's face. How do you know about your $200,000 debt? The cocaine habit? The fact that you've been embezzling from your own clients to cover your losses? Marcus's smile was predatory. I own your debt now, Zion, which means I own you. Winter looked between them, confusion and growing fear on her face. That's impossible, Zion said weakly. Marcus pulled out his phone and played an audio recording. Zion's voice, clearly identifiable, detailing how he planned to frame Marcus for financial crimes while stealing his assets. I also have video of your meetings with my wife, Marcus continued. Photos of your intimate moments, records of every dollar you've stolen, and very detailed information about your drug purchases. Zion's legs seemed to give out, and he leaned against the wall. What do you want? Winter asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus looked at both of them, the woman he'd loved for 13 years and the man who'd helped her plan his destruction. When he spoke, his voice was as cold as winter. I want you to understand that your lives as you know them are over. What happens next depends on how cooperative you choose to be. At that moment, the hospital's front entrance exploded inward as Spencer Ortiz and two of his operatives burst through the doors, moving with military precision toward the elevator bank. Chapter 6, The Reckoning Begins. The sound of the hospital's front entrance being breached echoed through the corridors like a gunshot. Winter and Zion both jumped, their faces pale with terror as they realized this wasn't a coincidence. Spencer Ortiz and his team moved through the hospital with the efficiency of a military operation. They weren't there to cause harm. This was psychological warfare, designed to show Winter and Zion that Marcus could reach them anywhere, anytime. What is this? Zion demanded, his voice cracking. This is what happens when you declare war on the wrong man, Marcus said calmly. Spencer, report. Spencer approached, his team flanking him but maintaining professional distance. Package delivered to the Larson residence, sir. Judge Larson is currently reviewing the materials you prepared for him. Marcus turned back to Zion, whose face had gone white. Your father is looking at photographs of you with my wife, audio recordings of your criminal conspiracy, and detailed documentation of your drug purchases and gambling debts. How do you think that's affecting his Supreme Court nomination? Zion slumped against the wall. You can't do this. My family. Your family raised a snake, Marcus interrupted. They're about to learn what happens when that snake bites the wrong person. Spencer continued his report. The Simpson family has also received their package. Winter's trust fund has been frozen, pending investigation into potential criminal activity. Winter's face crumpled. My family's money. That's my inheritance. Was your inheritance, Marcus corrected. Your father is a smart businessman. He won't protect a daughter who's stealing from sick children. Marcus had spent weeks preparing this moment. He'd compiled evidence packages for every person who mattered in Winter and Zion's lives. Their families, their professional associates, their social circles. The packages contained irrefutable proof of their affair, their theft, and their conspiracy to frame Marcus. But this was just the beginning. Adam, Marcus said into his phone, execute Phase 2. Within minutes, police sirens could be heard approaching the hospital. Marcus had tipped off the authorities about Zion's drug purchases, providing them with times, locations, and dealer information that Spencer's team had gathered. "The police will be here in about 3 minutes," Marcus told Zion. "They're looking for you on drug possession charges. You can run, but my people will find you. Or you can listen to my offer." Zion was shaking now. "What offer?" "You're going to confess to everything," Marcus said. "The affair, the theft, the conspiracy. You're going to return every dollar you've stolen and provide testimony about your criminal activities. And if I do that, then I'll make sure you only spend 5 years in prison instead of 20. And your family might survive the scandal." Winter found her voice. "You can't do this to us. We have rights." Marcus turned to her with an expression that made her step back. "Rights? You forfeited your rights when you stole from our dying daughter's medical fund. You forfeited them when you planned to destroy me while I was fighting to save our child's life." The police sirens were getting closer. "Choose quickly," Marcus said. "Cooperation or complete destruction." Zion looked at Winter, then back at Marcus. The fight had gone out of him completely. "I'll confess," he whispered. "I'll return the money." "Good," Marcus said. "Spencer will escort you to the police station. Adam has already prepared your statement. You just need to sign it." As Spencer led Zion away, Winter grabbed Marcus's arm. "Please," she said. "We can work this out. Think about Lola." Marcus looked at her hand on his arm, then into her face. "Don't you ever say our daughter's name again. You're not her mother anymore. That's impossible. I have legal rights." "Not after you're convicted of financial fraud and conspiracy," Marcus said. "Taylor has already filed for emergency custody based on your criminal activity. By tomorrow, you'll never see Lola again." Winter's face crumpled, but Marcus felt nothing. The woman he'd loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd betrayed everything sacred. "You're a monster," she whispered. Marcus smiled. It was a terrible thing to see. "No, Winter. I'm what monsters have nightmares about. And you just woke me up." Chapter 7. Loose Ends. 3 days after the hospital confrontation, Marcus sat in his home office, reviewing the carnage with clinical satisfaction. Taylor Davis sat across from him, reading reports on his tablet while sipping coffee. Zion's confession was thorough, Taylor reported. He implicated Winter in everything: the affair, the theft, the conspiracy to frame you. The district attorney is recommending 10 years for him, 5 for her if she pleads guilty. Marcus nodded. "And the money?" "Every dollar recovered and returned to your accounts, plus interest and penalties that Zion's family agreed to pay." Apparently, Judge Larson values his reputation more than his son's financial comfort. The Larson family had indeed thrown Zion to the wolves. Judge Robert Larson had issued a public statement disowning his son and donated $500,000 to children's cancer research to atone for his family's shame. Zion's mother had filed for divorce and reverted to her maiden name. Zion himself was currently in protective custody, having received death threats from his former gambling associates who weren't pleased about their debts being exposed to law enforcement. "What about the Simpson family?" Marcus asked. Taylor smiled grimly. "Winter's father cut her off completely. Her trust fund has been redistributed to charity. Her brother publicly stated that she's no longer considered part of the family." Marcus felt a grim satisfaction. Winter had always valued her social status and family connections above all else. Losing both was a fate worse than prison for someone like her. But Marcus wasn't finished. Over the past week, he'd been executing the final phases of his revenge. Spencer's team had been busy making life difficult for anyone who'd enabled or ignored Winter and Zion's activities. The hotel where they'd conducted their affair found itself under investigation for money laundering after Marcus provided evidence of their cash transactions. The manager who'd been taking bribes to provide them with privacy was facing federal charges. The divorce attorney who'd advised Winter on asset hiding discovered that several of his own clients had filed malpractice suits against him, armed with evidence of his unethical practices that Marcus had uncovered during his investigation. Even Winter's personal trainer, who'd provided alibis for her affair, found himself dealing with drug possession charges after Spencer's team planted evidence in his gym. Marcus believed in scorched earth tactics. Everyone who'd helped his enemies would face consequences. There's one more thing, Taylor said carefully. Lola's been asking questions. Marcus looked up from his reports. His daughter was the one person in this entire situation who mattered more than revenge. What kind of questions? She knows her mother isn't coming around anymore. She's asking why and when she'll see her again. Marcus had been dreading this conversation. Lola was 12 years old and fighting cancer. She didn't need the additional trauma of learning about her mother's betrayal. What did you tell her? That her mother had to go away for a while, and that you'd explain everything when she was feeling better. Marcus nodded. Lola's health had continued improving, and her doctors were optimistic about remission. But she would need ongoing treatment for months, possibly years. I'll talk to her tomorrow, Marcus said. She deserves to know the truth, at least a version of it. Taylor stood to leave, then paused at the door. Marcus, I have to ask, was it worth it? All of this destruction, all these lives ruined. Marcus considered the question seriously. He'd always been a man who calculated costs and benefits with brutal honesty. They tried to destroy me and steal from our daughter while she was dying, he said finally. They showed no mercy, no consideration for an innocent child's life. Why should I show them any? Because you're better than they are? Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. No, Taylor, I'm worse than they are. That's why I won. After Taylor left, Marcus walked upstairs to check on Lola. She was sleeping peacefully in her room, her bald head covered by a colorful scarf. The doctors said her hair would grow back, along with her strength. Marcus sat beside her bed and watched her breathe. This was what mattered, his daughter's life and future. Everything else was just noise. His phone buzzed with a text from Spencer. Package delivered to Winter's cell. She knows what's coming next. Marcus deleted the message without reading it twice. Tomorrow would bring the final act of his revenge, and then this chapter of his life would be closed forever. Chapter 8, the final act. Winter Mills sat in her jail cell, staring at the photograph Spencer had delivered. The images showed her apartment, or what had been her apartment before Marcus's people had visited it. Everything was destroyed, not just damaged, but methodically obliterated. Her clothes were shredded, her furniture was broken beyond repair, her art collection was reduced to splinters and torn canvas. Even her personal photos had been defaced with surgical precision. But the message was clear. Marcus could reach her anywhere, anytime, even from inside a federal detention facility. The photographs came with a note written in Marcus's precise handwriting. This is what your life looks like now. Tomorrow, it gets worse. Winter had been in custody for a week, held without bail due to the severity of the charges and the prosecution's argument that she was a flight risk. Her public defender, appointed after her family cut off funding for private attorneys, had advised her to take the plea deal Zion had already accepted. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution, and forfeiture of any claim to Marcus's assets or custody of Lola. Winter had refused, still believing she could find a way out of this nightmare. That was before the photographs arrived. Now she understood that Marcus wasn't interested in justice through the courts. This was personal annihilation, and he had resources she couldn't fight. The next morning, Winter was transferred to the courthouse for what her lawyer called a status conference. She expected to meet with prosecutors about her plea negotiations. Instead, she found herself in a small conference room face-to-face with Marcus. He looked exactly the same as always, calm, well-dressed, utterly in control. But there was something different in his eyes, something cold and final that made Winter's skin crawl. "Hello, Winter," he said pleasantly. "What do you want?" she asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I want you to understand what your life is going to look like," Marcus said. He placed a tablet on the table between them and activated the screen. The video showed Winter's sister Maria Martin walking to her car in a parking garage. Winter watched in horror as a van pulled up beside Maria and several men got out. "Don't worry," Marcus said as Winter gasped. "They didn't hurt her. They just delivered a message." The video continued, showing the men handing Maria an envelope before driving away. Winter's sister opened the envelope and pulled out photographs, the same images of Winter and Zion's affair that Marcus had sent to everyone else. Maria will receive similar packages every week for the next 5 years. Marcus continued. So will your parents, your remaining friends, your former colleagues, everyone you've ever known will receive regular reminders of what you are. Winter stared at the screen, understanding beginning to dawn. You're going to torment my family forever. Not forever, Marcus corrected. Just until you're dead. The casual way he said it made Winter's blood freeze. The federal prison system is dangerous. Marcus continued conversationally. Inmates die from violence, from medical negligence, from suicide. Tragic accidents happen all the time. You can't threaten me like this. I'm not threatening you, Marcus said. I'm explaining your reality. You see, I've made arrangements. Spencer has contacts in the federal system, guards who need extra income, inmates who owe favors. Your life in prison is going to be difficult. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Unless, of course, you choose a different option. What option? Marcus placed a second tablet on the table. This one showed a document, a confession that detailed not just Winter's affair and theft, but also included admissions to crimes she'd never committed. Sign this, and your family will be left alone, Marcus said. Refuse, and they'll suffer for your choices for the rest of their lives. Winter read the confession with growing horror. It claimed she'd been embezzling from children's charities for years, that she'd been involved in drug trafficking, that she'd physically abused Lola. This is all lies, she whispered. It doesn't matter, Marcus replied. I have evidence to support every claim, manufactured evidence, but evidence nonetheless. Sign this, and you'll be transferred to a maximum security facility where life expectancy is measured in months, not years. But your family will be safe. And if I don't sign, then you'll serve your 5 years in relative safety, but your family will live in hell. Your sister will lose her job when her employer learns about your crimes. Your parents will be ostracized from their social circles. Your brother's political career will be destroyed. Marcus stood to leave. You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely. It's the last choice you'll ever make that matters. As he reached the door, Winter called out, What about Lola? What will you tell her about me? Marcus turned back, and for a moment, his mask of control slipped. Winter saw the depths of his hatred, pure and burning like molten steel. I'll tell her the truth, he said quietly, that her mother was a selfish woman who cared more about money than family. And when she's old enough to understand, I'll show her everything. The recordings, the evidence, the plans you made to destroy us. She'll hate you for keeping her from me. Marcus smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Winter had ever seen. No, he said, she'll hate you for betraying her, just like I do. Chapter 9. Ashes and New Beginnings. 6 months later, Marcus Mills stood in the garden behind his Bellevue mansion, watching Lola play with their new golden retriever puppy. Her hair had grown back in soft brown curls, and the color had returned to her cheeks. The doctors had declared her in full remission 2 weeks ago. Lola laughed as the puppy, named Hope at her insistence, chased a tennis ball across the perfectly manicured lawn. She was 13 now, taller and stronger than she'd been before her illness. More importantly, she was happy. Marcus had told her an edited version of the truth about her mother's disappearance. Winter had made some bad choices and wouldn't be coming home. Lola had cried for days, but children were resilient. With time, therapy, and Marcus's constant presence, she'd begun to heal. She still asked about Winter sometimes, but less frequently. Marcus suspected that on some level, Lola understood more than she let on. Children were perceptive about adult emotions, and Winter's absence from the most critical period of Lola's illness hadn't gone unnoticed. Taylor Davis joined Marcus on the patio, carrying 2 cups of coffee and the final report on the Winter situation. It's over, Taylor said simply, handing Marcus the file. Marcus opened it and read the death certificate dated 3 days ago. Winter Mills, age 38, had died in her cell at the Federal Correctional Facility in Dublin, California. Cause of death was listed as suicide by hanging. Any complications? Marcus asked. None. The guards on Spencer's payroll ensured she had access to materials and privacy. The investigation will conclude she couldn't handle the shame of her crimes and chose to end her suffering. Marcus nodded and closed the file. He felt nothing, no satisfaction, no regret, no sense of closure. Winter's death was simply the final data point in an equation he'd solved months ago. What about Zion? Still alive, but barely, Taylor replied. He's in protective custody after his third accident in 6 months. Someone keeps attacking him in prison. Different inmates each time. No pattern the authorities can trace. Marcus had decided that death would be too quick for Zion Larson. Instead, he'd arranged for the man to live in constant fear, never knowing when the next attack would come or how severe it would be. Zion would spend every day for the next decade looking over his shoulder, wondering if this would be the day someone finished the job. It was a more fitting punishment for someone who'd planned Marcus's destruction with such calculated cruelty. "Daddy," Lola's voice interrupted his thoughts. She was standing at the edge of the patio, Hope panting at her feet. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you sad about Mom?" Marcus studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden knowledge. But Lola's expression was simply curious, the way children were when trying to understand adult emotions. "I'm sad about the choices she made," Marcus said carefully. "But I'm not sad that it's just us now." Lola nodded thoughtfully. "I miss her sometimes, but I'm glad you're here." "I'll always be here," Marcus promised. "No matter what happens, you and I are a team." Lola smiled and ran back to her puppy, the conversation already forgotten in the way of children. Taylor watched this exchange with interest. "Do you think she'll ever learn the whole truth?" Marcus considered the question. "Maybe when she's older. Maybe never. It depends on what's best for her. And if she finds out what you did, how you destroyed her mother." Marcus looked at his daughter, laughing as Hope licked her face with puppy enthusiasm. Lola was the only person in the world whose opinion of him mattered, the only one whose judgment could hurt him. "Then I'll explain that sometimes protecting the people you love requires you to become someone terrible," Marcus said, "and that I'd make the same choices again without hesitation." Taylor was quiet for a moment. "You know, most people would say you went too far. Most people have never had someone try to steal from their dying child," Marcus replied. "Most people have never discovered that the person they trusted most in the world was planning their complete destruction." Marcus finished his coffee and stood to join Lola in the garden. As he walked away, he spoke over his shoulder to Taylor. "Besides, I didn't go too far. I went exactly as far as necessary to protect what matters most." Winter and Zion learned that actions have consequences. The world is a little bit safer because two predators are no longer hunting in it. Taylor watched Marcus crouch down to pet Hope while Lola explained the dog's training progress with typical 13-year-old enthusiasm. To any casual observer, they looked like a normal father and daughter enjoying a peaceful afternoon. But Taylor knew better. He'd watched Marcus Mills systematically destroy two people with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a warlord. He'd seen his friend transform from a loving husband into something far more dangerous. The transformation wasn't complete, though. Marcus was still capable of love, but only for those who'd earned it and proven their loyalty beyond question. For everyone else, he was exactly what he'd told Winter he was, the thing that monsters had nightmares about. As the sun set over Seattle, Marcus Mills played with his daughter in their garden, surrounded by the carefully tended beauty he'd built for their life together. The past was buried, the threats were eliminated, and the future stretched ahead full of possibility. He'd kept his promise to protect what mattered most. The cost had been his capacity for mercy, but Marcus had never considered that a fair trade. Some prices were worth paying. Some lines were worth crossing. And some people, once they chose to become enemies, deserved everything they got. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. My in-laws' house was where I went with my 5-year-old son. Then a neighbor came out and said, "No one has lived here for a long time." I immediately called my wife. "Did your parents move?" She replied, No, they're in the same house as before. What are you talking about? I was confused and couldn't understand. Then my son said, Daddy, look over there. And I trembled with fear. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. My name is Keith Hill, and until 3 months ago, I believed I had everything a man could want. A successful construction business that I'd built from nothing, a beautiful wife named Harmony, and our 5-year-old son, Tyler. We lived in a pristine suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, or at least thought they did. I'd met Harmony Porter 7 years ago at a charity auction. She was volunteering, radiant in a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair. I was there because my business partner Jared Rogers had dragged me along, insisting I needed to network with the upper class. Harmony wasn't upper class. She worked as a dental hygienist, but she had this grace about her that made every other woman in the room fade into the background. Our courtship was swift. Within 6 months, I'd proposed. Within a year, we were married. Tyler came along 2 years later, a perfect blend of both our features, but with my stubborn streak and her infectious laugh. At least, that's what I used to think. The construction business had been my life's work. Starting with nothing but a pickup truck and determination, I'd built Hill Construction into one of the most respected firms in the county. We specialized in custom homes for wealthy clients, and my reputation for quality and reliability had made me wealthy enough to provide Harmony with everything she wanted. She'd never had to work after Tyler was born. I want to be there for him, she'd said, and I supported that completely. A child should have his mother present, especially in those crucial early years. I worked long hours to ensure she could have that luxury. Harmony's parents, Robert and Margaret Porter, lived about 40 minutes away in an older part of town. They were simple people. He was a retired postal worker. She'd been a secretary at the local high school. They adored Tyler and always welcomed our visits with homemade cookies and stories about Harmony's childhood. At least, that's what I thought until last weekend. The discovery started innocently enough. Harmony had been visiting her parents every Sunday for the past month, taking Tyler with her. They're getting older, Keith, she'd explained. I want Tyler to have memories with his grandparents. I've been working on a particularly demanding project, a mansion for Julian Douglas, a tech entrepreneur who'd moved to our area. So I've been grateful for the quiet Sundays to catch up on paperwork. Last Sunday, however, the Douglas project had wrapped up early. I decided to surprise Harmony and Tyler by joining them at the Porter's house. Maybe we could all have dinner together, I thought. I could pick up some steaks on the way and grill them in their backyard like old times. I drove through the familiar neighborhoods, past the strip mall where Harmony and I had shared our first date at a little Italian restaurant that had since closed down. The Porters lived in Maplewood Estates, a neighborhood that had seen better days but maintained a certain dignity with its tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns. When I pulled into the Porters' driveway, something felt off immediately. The house looked empty, not just quiet, but genuinely vacant. The lawn was overgrown. Newspapers were piled up by the front door, and there was a for sale sign in the yard that looked weathered, like it had been there for months. Tyler wasn't in the backyard where he usually played. Harmony's car was nowhere to be seen. Confused, I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I peered through the windows and saw furniture covered in sheets, the kind of setup you see in houses that have been abandoned. That's when Mrs. Hendricks emerged from the house next door. She was an elderly woman who'd lived there for decades, always friendly during our previous visits. "Excuse me," I called out to her. "Do you know where the Porters went?" She looked at me with genuine surprise. "The Porters? Honey, no one has lived in that house for a long time. They moved out about 4 months ago. Something about needing to be closer to Robert's medical specialist in Arizona. Didn't they tell you? 4 months ago. That was right around the time Harmony had started her regular Sunday visits to see them. My head spun as I tried to process this information. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers and called Harmony. "Hey, baby," she answered cheerfully. "What's up?" "Tyler and I are just finishing lunch with Mom and Dad." "Did your parents move?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What?" "No, they're in the same house as before." "What are you talking about? Are you feeling okay?" I looked around the deserted property, then at Mrs. Hendricks, who was watching me with growing concern. I'm at their house right now, Harmony. It's empty. There's a for sale sign. The neighbor says they moved to Arizona 4 months ago. There was a long pause. Too long. Keith, you must be at the wrong address. We're here right now. Tyler, say hi to Daddy. I heard Tyler's voice in the background, but it sounded distant, muffled. Harmony, I'm standing in their driveway. I'm looking at the house where we've had Christmas dinner for the past 5 years. Where exactly are you? Another pause. You know what? Tyler just spilled juice all over himself. I need to clean him up. We'll talk when I get home. Okay? Love you. She hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Mrs. Hendricks approached me cautiously. Are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost. Before I could answer, a small voice called out from behind me. Daddy, Daddy, look over there. I spun around and saw Tyler running toward me from the direction of the street. But that was impossible. I just heard him in the background of Harmony's call, supposedly inside his grandparents' house. Tyler, how did you get here? He pointed excitedly toward a car parked 3 houses down, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Mommy's in that car, with Uncle Simon. They told me to wait in the car while they looked at houses, but I saw your truck and wanted to say hi. Uncle Simon. I'd never heard Harmony mention any Uncle Simon. As I looked toward the silver sedan, I saw movement in the front seat. 2 figures sitting very close together. Too close. Even from this distance, I could see the woman's auburn hair, unmistakably Harmony's. The man next to her had his arm around her, and they were kissing. I trembled with fear, but not the kind Tyler might inspire by jumping out from behind a tree. This was the fear that comes when your entire world starts crumbling beneath your feet, when you realize that everything you believed about your life might be a carefully constructed lie. Tyler, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, go wait by Daddy's truck for a minute. He skipped away happily, oblivious to the fact that he'd just destroyed our family with a few innocent words. I stood there watching my wife of 6 years embrace another man in broad daylight, 3 houses away from where she claimed to be visiting her parents who hadn't lived there in months. The methodical mind that had built my business from nothing began clicking into gear, analyzing the situation with cold precision. Harmony wasn't just cheating. She constructed an elaborate lie that involved our son, her parents' relocation, and God knows what else. The Sunday visits, the phone calls, the stories about Tyler playing with his grandparents. All of it was fiction designed to give her time with this Simon. As I watched them together, something inside me shifted. The loving husband, the trusting partner, the man who believed in the sanctity of our marriage. That man died right there on the sidewalk of Maplewood Estates. What replaced him was something harder, colder. Something that remembered every business rival who'd tried to cheat me. Every contractor who'd attempted to cut corners on my projects. Every person who'd ever mistaken my fairness for weakness. They'd all learned that Keith Hill was not a man to be crossed. Now it was time for my wife and her Uncle Simon to learn the same lesson. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. I drove home in silence, Tyler chattering happily in the back seat about how he'd had fun looking at houses with Mommy and Uncle Simon. Every innocent word from my son was another nail in the coffin of my marriage, but I kept my voice steady as I asked casual questions. Uncle Simon seems nice. How long have you known him? A long time. He gives me candy and lets me play games on his phone. Mommy says he's a very special friend. A special friend. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What kind of houses were you looking at? Pretty ones. Uncle Simon says maybe we'll all live together someday, like a big family. The rage that coursed through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not only was Harmony cheating, but she was involving our son in her fantasies of a future with this man. She was preparing Tyler for the destruction of our family, making him complicit in her betrayal. By the time we reached our house, I made several decisions. First, I wouldn't confront Harmony immediately. She'd had months to perfect her lies. She could explain away anything I threw at her in the heat of the moment. Second, I needed to know everything. Who Simon was, how long this had been going on, what exactly they were planning. Third, and most importantly, I was going to destroy them both. Harmony arrived home an hour later, full of stories about Tyler's wonderful day with Grandma and Grandpa Porter. She described lunch in detail, invented conversations, even mentioned how Margaret had taught Tyler a new card game. The ease with which she lied was breathtaking. "Oh, and Keith," she said as she prepared dinner, "I've been thinking. Maybe we should visit my parents more often. Tyler loves spending time there, and they're not getting any younger." I nodded along, playing the devoted husband while my mind cataloged every lie, every manipulation. "That's a great idea. Maybe I'll join you next Sunday." For just a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. "Oh, you don't need to do that. I know how busy you are with work. Besides, it's nice for Tyler to have special time with his grandparents. Still, I'd like to see Robert and Margaret. It's been too long." "Of course," she said, but I could see the wheels turning in her head, already formulating new lies to cover her tracks. That night, after Harmony fell asleep, I began my investigation. I started with her phone, which she'd left charging on the nightstand. She'd always been trusting about her privacy, never bothering with complex passwords. The passcode was Tyler's birthday. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Months of text messages with someone listed as Sarah from work, clearly a fake contact name. The messages were explicitly sexual, filled with promises and plans. But more than that, they revealed the depth of her deception. She wasn't just having an affair. She was systematically dismantling our marriage from the inside. Messages about how Keith suspects nothing, how boring our life together was, how she deserved better than a simple construction worker. Plans for a future that involved taking Tyler and starting fresh somewhere else. Discussions about my business, my assets, my routines, all shared with her lover like intelligence reports. Simon Thompson, that was his real name, revealed in one of the earlier messages where she'd accidentally used it instead of her code name for him. A quick search on my laptop revealed he was a real estate agent, divorced, with a reputation for aggressive sales tactics and a lifestyle that seemed to exceed his apparent income. The most damning discovery was a series of photos she'd shared with him. Pictures of our house, our financials that she'd photographed from my desk, even images of Tyler sleeping in his bed. She was providing the stranger with a complete dossier of our lives. But the message that finally pushed me over the edge was dated just 3 days ago. "Keith's been working late on the Douglas project. Perfect time to get more photos of his business records. Simon says the construction company alone should be worth over $2 million if we can prove he's hiding assets." They weren't just planning to destroy my marriage. They were planning to rob me blind in the process. I spent the rest of the night learning everything I could about Simon Thompson. 34 years old, divorced 2 years ago under messy circumstances involving suspected infidelity. His ex-wife had gotten very little in the settlement, which suggested he was skilled at hiding assets. He worked for Pinnacle Realty, one of the larger firms in the area, and drove a silver BMW sedan, the same car Tyler had seen. Most interesting was his address, a luxury apartment complex that was definitely above what a mid-level real estate agent could afford. Either he was better at his job than his reviews suggested, or he had other sources of income. By morning, I had a plan. I'd always been methodical in my business dealings. Success in construction required careful planning, attention to detail, and the ability to see several steps ahead. You had to anticipate problems before they arose, have contingencies in place, and never let emotions cloud your judgment. I would approach this betrayal the same way I'd approach a complex building project. First, reconnaissance. Gather all the information, understand all the players, identify weaknesses and opportunities. Then, careful planning. Map out every step, every possible complication, every response to their likely moves. Finally, execution. Swift, thorough, and completely devastating. Over the next 2 weeks, I hired a private investigator named Peter Wright, recommended by my lawyer Jared Rogers. Peter was a former police detective who specialized in domestic investigations, and his rates were high enough to ensure discretion. "I need to know everything," I told him in his cramped office above a pawn shop. "Every meeting, every location, every person they talk to. Financial records, background checks, anything you can legally obtain." Peter studied the photos I'd printed from Harmony's phone. This is pretty extensive betrayal, Mr. Hill. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes it's easier to just cut your losses and move on. They're planning to take my son and rob me of everything I've built, I said. Moving on isn't an option. He nodded slowly. Okay, but understand, once we open this door, there's no closing it. You're going to learn things that will change how you see everything. Your wife, your marriage, maybe even yourself. Good. I want to see everything clearly. The first report came back a week later, and it was devastating in its thoroughness. Peter had tracked their movements, photographed their meetings, even recorded some of their conversations from his van using a parabolic microphone. Simon Thompson wasn't just a real estate agent. He was a specialist in what he called life transitions, helping people disappear from their old lives and start fresh somewhere else. Usually, this involved women who were divorcing wealthy husbands and wanted to hide assets before the proceedings began. Harmony wasn't his first mark. In fact, she was the third woman in 2 years he'd seduced for this specific purpose. The previous two had successfully divorced their husbands, hidden significant assets, and started new lives in other states, with Simon taking a substantial cut of their gains. But this time was different. This time, Simon had gotten emotionally involved. The recorded conversations revealed that he genuinely cared for Harmony, and more troubling, he'd convinced her that taking Tyler was not just possible but necessary. "The kid's attached to you now," I heard him say in one recording. "Keith won't fight for custody if he thinks Tyler wants to be with us. And once we're in Florida, establishing residency, it'll be almost impossible